I want to say something about espresso. We all know what it is, although in a few moments I will make sure that we do. But I've discovered that a lot of us don't know why espresso is so absolutely crucial to the understanding as well as the enjoyment of coffee. I hope you've seen our video on coffee's roast levels from city to French. And as you look through that list, you'll notice that there is no level called espresso or espresso roast level. There's just no such thing. Espresso is a process and not a roast level. Some people love their espresso at city. Some people love their espresso at French. Other people love their espresso somewhere in between. Each of them is loving espresso, regardless of the level to which those beans have been roasted. Here we can simply say that espresso is a process that has three components: finely ground coffee, hot water, and pressure. Why these three components? Well, the best answer here requires us to step back into history and ask why people wanted espresso in the first place. The answer here, oddly enough, has nothing to do with taste. It is not gustatory, to use the technical term. In the late 19th century, at the very beginning of Italy's Industrial Revolution, factory owners noticed that their employees worked more efficiently and more quickly if they were caffeinated, if they were given coffee breaks. Now that's hardly a surprise, since most of us tend to think that our day doesn't begin when we crawl out of bed, but instead when we have that first cup or mug of espresso. I get that. But the problem is that back then, there were only two real ways of making coffee. One, which we would today call percolation, where you bubble hot water up and through and around coffee grounds. And the other, Turkish, where you take extremely finely ground coffee, dump it into hot water, stir it around, wait for long enough for the coffee grounds to become saturated and sink to the bottom of the cup, and then slurp the coffee off the top of the cup. The problem is that both of these are very time-consuming, and Italian industrialist capitalists didn't want to have their workers away from their jobs for that amount of time. So they wanted something that was faster. And in 1884, an Italian inventor whose name was Angelo Moriando produced a mock-up, produced a prototype of a machine that would force very small amounts of very hot water through very finely ground coffee into very small cups. Using less hot water and less coffee and less energy and smaller cups, less expensive cups, they could caffeinate their workers in seconds rather than minutes. Poof! Coffee breaks were much shorter now because the owners could depend upon their workers being just as caffeinated in seconds as it used to take minutes to achieve. But what are its benefits? First, espresso is the second best way to experience what a particular cultivar tastes like. Remember that the word cultivar refers to a particular coffee bean from a particular or specific country or region or area or valley or hillside, roasted to a particular specific level. The first best way to experience what the flavor characteristics of that bean are, of course, is to chew it. That way you get all, and I do mean all, of its flavor-bearing molecules. But most people aren't going to do that, even though they would acquire those flavor-bearing molecules undiluted by things like water and heat. So while chewing is optimal for flavor acquisition, it's not psychologically comforting, and most people won't do it. But they can come close. And espresso is a very good way of doing that. The Turkish process is another excellent way of doing that, and we will soon be producing a video on the Turkish grind process and its effects on coffee. Second then, because espresso beans are ground so fine, although nowhere near as fine as Turkish, they coat your mouth and tongue and throat with liquefied coffee beans. And let's just call it paste. It's coffee that is diluted by water and saliva and the coffee solids. And that that paste will remain in your mouth and your throat for quite a long time, at least 20 to 30 minutes if you don't swallow anything else. And if you've chosen the right espresso for your flavor preferences, your taste preferences, this aftertaste will last quite a long time. It'll be pleasant, it'll be mild, and of course, it'll be very reminiscent of the espresso that you just drank. And here's another hint. Try this. After you've drunk your espresso, and wait for several minutes until you do this, then open your mouth slightly with your lips barely open and breathe in. It'll feel like an ice cube is rushing through your mouth. That is a very invigorating and enjoyable experience, and it will continue on for several minutes after you swallow the last of your actual espresso. A final question then. Is espresso more caffeine intensive than brewed coffee? Well, the answer is no, it isn't, if you're thinking about the amount of coffee used, but yes, if you're thinking about the amount of coffee drunk or ingested. Coffee beans themselves have only X amount of caffeine per bean. And if you ingest all of that caffeine in 40 milliliters of water, rather than 400 milliliters of water, 8 ounces or so, you'll get precisely the same amount of caffeine either way, but of course with much less dilution in espresso. Okay, I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions, email them to us at HelioRoastCoffee@icloud.com. And until then, enjoy that shot of espresso.